Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The first major G7 summit agenda reached its desired end in Italy. The nations have agreed on an outline deal to provide $50 billion of loans for Ukraine. This will be done using interest from Russian assets frozen after Moscow's invasion of its neighbor in 2022. US President Biden said that Ukraine will be provided with 5 Patriot missile defense systems. He said, and I quote, "Everything we have is going to Ukraine until its needs are met." End of quote. The leaders also shared a light moment as they attended a skydiving demonstration program in a golf course. The Gaza conflict, artificial intelligence, Africa are some of the other important items on the agenda. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also arrived in Italy. He's scheduled to hold crucial bilateral meetings with G7 leaders over the next few days. It is expected that the Indian delegation will bring up key issues faced by the Global South. This is Modi's first foreign trip since he took charge as India's Prime Minister for the third time. Let me now go across to former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal. We are also joined by Strategic Affairs expert Brahma Chalani and Ambassador Rakesh Sood, former Ambassador to France. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the program. Ambassador Sibal, if I can begin with you, what do you think is the importance for India when it comes to the G7 summit? This is also the Prime Minister's first overseas visit. What is the development agenda that we would like to take back or probably have a victory for during the summit?
Well, a couple of things. The first time we were invited to a G7 meeting was by France when I was ambassador here many years ago. And since then, our Prime Minister has been attending these G7 meetings. So it's nothing new. We are experienced in this regard. Our leadership is experienced. We know what their agenda is. Now, of course, with the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, it's very difficult for the G7 to have a positive, forward-looking, constructive, peace-loving agenda, frankly. Because whatever they are doing in Ukraine especially is having great repercussions on the global financial system. This decision to confiscate or to freeze $350 billion of Russian central bank assets, which are largely in Belgium, and use the interest on these $5 billion a year to pay off the loan, loan payment by Ukraine for $50 billion aid to them is outrightly against international law. In fact, the president of the Central Bank of European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, has said this is illegal. And President Putin has said that this action will not go unpunished. In fact, this is going to impose a very big blow to the sanctity of the global financial system and will have long-term repercussions. So G7 is actually in a warmongering mode, is not in a peace-mongering mode at all. And Prime Minister Modi will certainly pursue the agenda that he pursued at the G20 to sensitize them on the problems that the global South is facing, and which are not going to be resolved or addressed if this is the path down which the G7 want to go. The G7 actually lost its usefulness and its relevance to a great degree after the financial crisis of 2008. And that's how the G20 was raised to the summit level. But now if G7 continues down this path and takes more and more actions which are at variance with international law and do not actually have a perspective of peace in Ukraine, and as well as in Gaza, I'm afraid the task of our Prime Minister in Italy is going to be very difficult to persuade them to change their course.
It's going to be tough. Right. Yes, especially when they want to penalize Russia, they want to punish Russia and hold them accountable. Brahma Chalani, if I can get you in at this stage, the Prime Minister had a meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky as well. Do you think that in the third term, Prime Minister's stand on Russia-Ukraine war is going to change or will be one of continuity and status quo?
Why would it change? India has been pursuing an independent approach to international affairs. Ukraine war is just one example of India's independence and neutrality. Why would it change? Because that would militate against Indian interests. Even if there had been another party in office in New Delhi, India's stance on the Ukraine war would not have been different. The fact is that the G7 member states' share of the global GDP has been on the decline. As their economic strength declines, their global influence diminishes, and the relevance of the G7 itself is being questioned in the West. And to make matters worse, the G7 leaders, other than Italy's Meloni, face winning support at home. Sunak is likely to be gone in 3 weeks once British elections are over. Macron's future will be decided on June 30th. Trudeau, after 8 years in power, has become increasingly controversial and faced in autumn, and Biden stays at possible defeat in November. The only leaders of the G7 summit that are strong at home are Meloni and Modi in a way. It's because of the changing world, the changing balance of power, that Prime Minister Meloni invited to the summit prominent non-Western figures, including the leaders of India, Brazil, Turkey, and the UAE. She also invited Zelensky and the Pope, who, to Zelensky's chagrin, has been calling for a ceasefire. Ceasefire has become imperative, and the Pope can play the role of an honest broker. Unfortunately, what the G7 summit is highlighting is America's and the West's deepening involvement in the Ukraine war. The two important decisions from this summit: one, America's 10-year security agreement with Ukraine, and the other is a $50 billion loan to Ukraine that will be repaid with stolen interest generated on the frozen Russian central bank assets. So both the steps are not exactly conducive to the West's own long-term interests.
Right. Mr. Chelani, I think we're having some issue with your line as well. Your video had frozen for a second on the program. I'll request you to log off and log in. Let me now also go across to Ambassador Rakesh Sood at this point. Ambassador Sood, now, keeping in mind the development agenda that Prime Minister Modi has in his third term, what would we like to take away, or what is the message that we would like to deliver at the G7?
I think Prime Minister Modi would like to focus on some of the achievements of the G20 summit that was hosted by India last year. And among those, one of the key issues would be the global digital infrastructure. That was a major point of focus. And AI, which is part of the global digital infrastructure, is one of the items on the agenda of the G7. Now, frankly, I am not aware as to what the G7 has been able to achieve or what the discussions on AI were in Italy. But we do know that there is an EU law on AI that has been adopted. There is also a presidential order, a White House notification that US has put out. UK had hosted an AI safety meeting last year in November. So there are a number of efforts underway here. Now, whether Prime Minister Modi was able to point to what were India's special interests, because India has its own experience vis-a-vis digital infrastructure. And we have done certain things which we have demonstrated are scalable for a population of 1.4 billion. I think that is something which the Global South is interested in. So that would be something. Other than that, I think I would tend to agree with both Ambassador Sybil as well as Brahma in terms of the fact that on Ukraine or on Gaza, there would be very little that we would be able to contribute in terms of peace building or peacemaking. As we know, this meeting, the G7 meeting, is going to be followed by a meeting in Switzerland called the Peace Conference. This is supposed to be on Ukraine. President Zelensky will be there. But Russia has not been invited. So this is like, being asked to conduct a marriage with one partner absent. I don't know how it can even be called a peace conference in that sense. So that's where I would think is...
Right. Okay, let me go across to Ambassador Sybil once again. Ambassador Sybil, now again coming to the meeting with Ukraine. When it comes to the upcoming peace summit, yes, Ukraine wants the Prime Minister to join. We are still deciding our level of representation for this meeting. What do you think President Zelensky would be expecting from India in terms of the role that India should play behind the scenes?
Look, this is a bit ridiculous. India at the Prime Minister level should not attend the peace summit. Look, of the 5 BRIC members, original members, 4 are not going. Okay, China and Russia, one can expect, but Russia has not been invited and China has said no, but Brazil and South Africa are also not going. And India should not break ranks with the BRICS so easily. However, we've always said that we want a way out of this conflict through dialogue and diplomacy. So even if an effort is being made which is manifestly deficient, but which has as its objective some kind of peace, India should not turn its back on it entirely. And therefore, as we have done in the past, we have participated in the 4 earlier meetings, we should do it at a senior bureaucratic level, at which we should state our position very clearly that you can't have a peace unless Russia is part of the initial discussions. You can't dictate to Russia the decisions that might be taken or the line or the approach that might be agreed in terms of future peace at this summit without Russia. So it's a non-starter, and we should not sully our own position by the Prime Minister going there at all, or the Foreign Minister going. As I said, it should be at a senior bureaucratic level, and that should be enough, because we have also to see what our equities are with the West, with the United States. Now, Jake Sullivan is a very prime mover of this whole affair, and I believe he's visiting India or will visit India shortly. And we have a lot of equities, as I said, with the United States. Therefore, we can't entirely rebuff the United States. So this will be a neat way out. It will essentially be a listening participation by us. We will see what the others are saying, and we should stick to our position of neutrality, of finding a balance, of advocating genuine peace and a genuine dialogue, and underline that without Russia's presence and active participation right from the start, there cannot be any serious move towards peace.
Okay, Brahmachalani, coming to you on the China question, I think one thing which is occupying a lot of mind space of the G7, apart from the war in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine, is China's trade and economic policy. The large-scale subsidies that China is giving, which is overcrowding and oversupplying global markets with cheap electronic goods, electric cars, electric two-wheelers that they are worried about. Also, China's large impact on global supply chains. What do you think will be G7's message vis-a-vis China?
The problem for the G7 member states is that because of their growing involvement in the Ukraine war, their space to deal with China is getting constricted. Their policy toward China is so constrained that if you look at Biden's approach, he has imposed no sanctions on any Chinese entity for doing business with sanctioned Russian entities. That underscores the fact that US can ill afford to antagonize China at this juncture, because if China and Russia were to formalize a military alliance, that would be America's worst geopolitical nightmare come true. So the deeper the West gets involved in the Ukraine war, the less space they have to deal with China's expansionism or with China's economic economic diplomacy and its no holds barred trade approach, which is to dump goods, to expand its market share, to source resources from other parts of the world, there is very little leverage that the West has as long as it is involved in a growing confrontation with Russia.
Right. Let me take a break at this point. When we return, we'll go across to Ambassador Rakesh Sood about our relationship with some of the key partners we've had bilateral with, including France. What next for the India-France relationship, the India-Italy relationship? We will be discussing that in detail in just a bit. We'll request all our guests to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. We still have with us former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal, Ambassador Rakesh Sood, former diplomat, and also Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert. Ambassador Sood, our relationship with France. Now, Prime Minister Modi had his first bilateral with President Macron of France. What do you think we can expect from the India-France relationship going forward? There's a lot at stake in the defense sector, in the IT sector as well, and education.
Well, the relationship between India and France is the first strategic partnership that India established with any country. So it is a mature relationship, and Prime Minister Modi and President Macron have met each other regularly. In fact, President Macron was in India for the Republic Day earlier this year. And as you said, there are a whole host of issues which are subject to conversations between the two leaders, as well as the two governments, between the ministries at different levels, foreign ministry, defense ministry. There is the nuclear aspect, there's the space-related cooperation, there is counterterrorism, intelligence sharing, Indo-Pacific, defense ties. You name it, there is almost every single aspect of our relationship. We have a dialogue with France. Right now, of course, there are discussions going on with the Rafale Marine aircraft, for the Indian aircraft carrier, and there are other items as well. However, for President Macron, the crucial thing will be the snap election that he has announced. The first round will take place at the end of this month. This is coming after the European Parliament elections, where the outcome was something that President Macron felt unhappy about. You had Marine Le Pen winning nearly twice as many, polling twice the percentage that President Macron's party was polling. And I think President Macron felt that he could take a gamble to announce an election, so that what remains to be seen is whether he is able to, whether his gamble is successful, in the sense that does his party come back, does his party have a rebound, as it were, and he's able to get a majority, because right now he's running a minority government, or whether the mood has shifted decisively, in which case he may be forced into a situation which the French call cohabitation, where you may have a different party, a prime minister from a different party holding the reins of government in that sense. So that is something that is going to be on President Macron's mind when he meets Prime Minister Modi this time.
Right. Let me go across to Ambassador Sibal once again. Ambassador Sibal, now, when it comes to India's priorities going forwards, a lot of foreign powers would like to gauge the mood in India and India's political muscle now that the elections are over. We've seen the NDA coming back, but with a reduced number. Do you think this in any way changes India's approach to foreign policy in any way?
No, not at all. Not at all. These countries are going to deal with whoever is in power. And Modi has come back to power once again, and the third time, which is quite an achievement, even with a reduced majority. He will be at the helm of the affairs. The coalition, it seems, would be stable. But leave that aside. As it was said earlier on by Brahma, I think, look at where the other leaders stand. Sunak is going to be out of power very soon. The Labour is going to come back. Macron has been weakened very severely by the European elections and has been forced to call for new elections to the parliament. Biden's future is very uncertain. There are people who think that Trump is going to win. Germany is in disarray. It has a coalition government. Scholz is not particularly strong as a leader. Meloni, yes, Meloni has some strength in Italy, but she is also in a minority, frankly. And there are voices around her which have a different approach to foreign affairs than she has, especially vis-a-vis Russia. So what I mean is that these leaders whom I'm talking about are running their countries, and we are dealing with them. So therefore, they're going to deal with Prime Minister Modi in any case. But that's the first thing. The second thing is that India remains important in the larger geopolitical scheme of things for the West, whether it is Indo-Pacific or the rise of China and the consequences of that, or India's market, India's growth, India's contribution to technology development, innovation, and everything else is human capital, which is valued by the West. Then our position with regard to all climate change discussions, which are very important and very vital for the future of the planet as such. So all these factors will actually mean that the other countries, other leaders are going to deal with Prime Minister Modi, even if he's come back with the reduced majority, because behind them is India, 1.4 billion people, which is going to be the third largest economy, hopefully by 2027 or by 2030. These are the things that are going to weigh with them.
Okay.
The fact that he's come back with which is an internal affair. Yes, of course, domestically he may face more opposition, and that opposition may want to rope in the usual lobbies, anti-Indian lobbies, to generate pressure on India. But I don't think that's going to materially affect India's conduct of foreign policy.
Right. Final question to Brahma Chalani. Brahma Chalani, right now we have Italy. Giorgia Meloni, a right-wing leader, she is backing every proposal in support of Ukraine, backing the G7. But you have the rise of the right in the European Union, and you have an election coming up in the United States as well. Labour Party is likely to come to power in UK. How do you think the change in governments across the G7, EU is not a member of the G7, but it is a country which participates in the summits. How do you think the nature of the elections and the nature of the political mood is going to impact the decisions that the Western world is going to take vis-a-vis Ukraine and vis-a-vis Israel?
The West is at a crossroads. The West accounts for just 12% of the global population, yet it dominates international institutions. It controls international financial architecture. This will change. In fact, there are signs of change already there. And thanks to its own overreach, the West is likely to lose its global supremacy, including its hold on the international financial architecture. And I think confiscating Russia's central bank assets and seizing the interest on those assets has forced a number of countries to think about their own central bank assets. The reason why the gold price has reached a record high is because of the attempt by some central banks to hedge, to diversify. Some central banks are holding gold. But more importantly, in terms of internal developments in the West, we see a rightward shift in domestic politics in Europe, in North America. Britain is probably the sole exception where the Labour Party is expected to come back to power. But this rightward shift in domestic politics will have a very important bearing on the West's own future, its involvement in the war in Ukraine. Most right-wing parties in Europe, for example, don't like Europe's growing involvement in a war in a country that is not central to the West's long-term future. So there would be significant policy shifts if this trend towards the right continues.
Right. We've completely run out of time, but we'd like to thank Ambassador Rakesh Sood, Ambassador Kamal Sibal and Brahma Chalani for joining us on the program. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. But before we let you go, we leave you with these visuals of a brawl that broke out in the Italian parliament amid the G7 summit. This incident occurred during a vote on the controversial government bill concerning local autonomies. The altercation resulted in an opposition lawmaker being hospitalized.
This